Hi friends, a very good morning and welcome back. This is CA Devang Kothari. Now last session we had started with the subject of costing at your CA final level. Let us recap what we did in that last session yesterday. First of all, I told you the name of the subject and how is this subject of costing at final level different from the costing subject in your intermediate level. Well, remember, at intermediate level your subject was named as costing or cost and management accounting. Now at final level the name of your subject is much longer name. It is strategic cost management and performance evaluation. How is this subject different? Well, the main points of difference, if I revise, it was that at intermediate level your subject was mostly based on calculation work. Now at final level it is not just calculation, but now it is more analytical and more towards decision making. Yes, so now the way you answer questions now will be very much different. Yes, gradually during our syllabus we will learn how are you supposed to answer the questions. Yes, anyways, yesterday what we had started with was first I told you the difference between intermediate and final level costing. Then I showed you all the chapters that are involved in your subject now. Yes, I also told you the sequence how we will be studying the chapters. I started with chapter number 1. Basically chapter number 1 is a full theory chapter, and the theory is not intermediate level. It is a new kind of theory that you will have. But I told you that in my book chapter number 1 I have included practicals, which is revision of your intermediate level. Yes, look, basically if this subject is final level costing, then definitely the institute expects that you already know the intermediate level costing. But yes, most of you must have forgotten the things done at intermediate level. So we started with a revision. What did we revise yesterday? Well, right now we are revising the yesterday's revision. So what did we revise yesterday? We learned again about what was the cost sheet. Yes, I gave you the entire cost sheet format. Your cost sheet format I had given you like this. In your cost sheet format, if you notice, you start with all the things related to materials. You have material purchase plus purchase expenses minus purchase returns will give you the net purchase. Then add opening less closing raw material will give you the consumption. If raw material has any scrap generated, deduct that scrap, it will give you the material consumption cost. Yes, the consumption that you get here is the cost of material, because only the material which is used in production, only that will come in my cost sheet. That material is called as material consumed. Then plus direct labor, direct expenses gives you prime cost. Prime cost is the total of all direct items of cost, plus the factory overheads means indirect cost incurred in the factory, that gives you the factory cost, also called as works cost. Add opening WIP less closing WIP. Remember, if closing raw materials indicates unused material, similarly closing WIP indicates unfinished goods, unfinished production, incomplete units of production. Where are these incomplete units located? Well, these incomplete units are located inside the machine. It is still lying inside the machine, so these units are incomplete. Remove them. Why remove them? Because ultimately you want to reach the cost of sales, meaning cost of only the units which are sold. Now incomplete units cannot be sold, so you remove incomplete units and you remove cost of that incomplete units, value of that incomplete units. So now what remains here is the value of only completed units. I call that as factory cost of completed units, plus admin overheads, which relates to production, plus any primary packaging minus scrap value of process loss. We did all that yesterday. Will give you cost of production. This cost of production is my total cost of producing the completed units. But out of all these completed units, some units might remain unsold. Unsold units were called as closing finished goods. Remove that unsold units, so what remains is the goods sold. That gives my format. Add opening FG less closing FG will give you the cost of goods sold. Yes, Also, we learnt two methods for valuation of this closing FG. We learnt two methods for valuation of this closing FG. FIFO method, weighted average method. What was FIFO method? FIFO method says that first in, first out, meaning the goods which are produced first are sold out first. Which is produced first? Opening FG units are produced first. So opening FG units will be sold out first. Hence, what remains unsold will be definitely the units out of current year production. So conclusion is that as per FIFO method, closing FG will be valued at the rate of current year. As per FIFO method here, closing finished goods will be valued at the rate of current year. While what was weighted average method? Remember I gave you that example regarding the fuel tank in your vehicle. Well, that example is the best example to remember weighted average method. So as per weighted average method, which units are sold first? Well, is the opening, that is previous year units, sold first? No. Are current year units sold first? No. What is sold first is neither opening nor current year, but what is sold first is sold out of the mixture of opening units and current year units. I already had opening units in my stock in your fuel tank, plus new units were added. Now that the new units are added, both get mixed up, and whatever is now sold, it is sold out of this mixture. Whatever is sold, it is sold out of this mixture. So what remains unsold is also out of that same mixture. What remains unsold is also out of that same mixture. So as per weighted average method, my unsold units, that is closing FG, will be valued based on the mixture. Based on the mixture, so you did valuation by comparing this mixture of 18,000 units valued 36,600, then 3,000 which is out of that same mixture should be valued what? You get 6,100. Done? Yes. So this was your valuation by FIFO method. This was your valuation by weighted average method. Done? This was the main reason why we learnt the cost sheet format. Yes. Also, another reason to learn the cost sheet format was to remind you. It was to remind you that what does cost of production mean? What does cost of production include? What does cost of goods sold mean? What does cost of sales mean? Anyways, now that you have cost of goods sold, on that cost of goods sold, I add the general admin overheads plus selling overheads gives you cost of sales plus profit will give you the sales. Done? Yes. Aja, regarding admin overheads, I told you there are two places where I have shown the admin overheads. You see admin overheads comes over here also, and some admin overheads come over here. Which admin overheads will come first? Which admin overheads will come down here? Well, certain admin overheads are incurred on all the units of production. If that is the case, then you put admin overheads first over there. But certain admin overheads are incurred only on the sold units. Those admin overheads you put down here after COGS. Yes, so the difference is that this admin is incurred on all the completed production. Hence I say it is related to production because it is incurred on all the completed units. These completed units. While this admin overheads comes later because it is also incurred on only completed units. But which completed units? Well, this admin is incurred only on those completed units which are sold. We saw here that all the completed units are not sold, so you remove the unsold units. Then what you have are the goods sold. General admin is incurred only on the goods sold. General admin is added only to the sold units. Do remember that. Yes, in general, for any question for admin overheads, if no specific hint is given, if nothing is mentioned, then you assume it is always a general admin. But if there is specifically mentioned in the question, like in question 1, you notice that it was specifically written that admin overheads is 20% of factory cost of completed units. So they have specifically mentioned that this admin overheads is incurred on the completed units. If it is incurred on the completed units only, meaning it is your admin overheads related to production. Done? Yes. Okay. So this was question 1 that we did in my yesterday's session. After that, I made you write some notes. We did notes. I gave you notes regarding what is FIFO method, what is weighted average method, how is calculation done in them. Plus, I also gave you notes regarding certain examples of profit calculation. I'll remind you that also profit calculation, like cost plus profit is the sales, but the profit might be given as a percentage of something. If profit is given as a percentage of something and that something is missing, if that something is missing, assume that missing to be 100. That was the rule I gave you. Done? Yes. Okay. Anyways, we'll take that discussion further now. My next set of notes that I now give you, well, note number 1 you had written was regarding FIFO and weighted average. I dictated that to you. Note number 2 was this profit calculation that you had copied. Going further, note number 3, now I'll make you write. Note number 3 that I'm now going to give you is regarding variable cost, fixed cost, semi-variable cost. What do these things mean? Well, 4 things I will be covering up here. You can just start writing. My note number 3 will further divide into 4 categories. Which 4? We'll see, chalo. First, I will differentiate that what is variable cost, what is fixed cost. You might say that, sir, we are at now CA final level. This is what you had learned in not intermediate. This is what you might have learned in your foundation, CPT level also. But trust me, still there are many of you who make conceptual mistakes in understanding the nature of these two costs. Yes, so I will explain the nature of these two costs. I'll explain a definition, then some examples to differentiate the nature of these two costs. So think about it. Tell me, what is variable cost? Variable cost you have learned since your childhood. Yes, your childhood. Look, anything that you did before CA final level, I will say it was done in your childhood. Yeah. So variable cost, you might have learned in your childhood that variable cost is the cost which increases with the increase in production. Yes, while fixed cost, how do you define? Fixed cost does not increase with any increase in production. Yes, so variable cost increases with every extra unit that you produce. Fixed cost does not increase with any extra unit that you produce. Done? Yes. Okay, let us write that down. You can start writing along with me. Variable cost increases for every extra unit of production. and fixed cost remains fixed for any increase in production. Fixed cost remains fixed for any increase in production. This is how you have defined both these costs since many years. Yeah, but let me also give you an example for that. Say variable cost, best example I would say direct material cost. Direct material cost is a variable cost because more units I produce, more materials I will need. Yes, while fixed cost example, let me say, is rent, because if I produce more number of units, will I pay more rent for the factory? No. Yes. Look at this. For 1000 units production, if my material cost is rupees 2000, then for production of 1200 units, what will be the material cost? If material cost for 1000 units is 2000, then for 1200 units my material cost will become 2400. Like I said, with the increase in units, my cost will also increase proportionately. That becomes my variable cost. While for fixed cost, if I create example, it will go like this. That for 1000 units production, if my factory rent is rupees, if my factory rent is rupees 20,000, then for 1200 units production also my factory rent will remain same 20,000. Fixed cost does not increase with the increase in units. This is basically how we define variable cost and fixed cost. Done? Yes. Now notice some changes here. In case of fixed cost, does it mean that the fixed cost never increases? Does it mean that fixed cost permanently remains same fixed only? No. Fixed cost also can increase. Yes, it is possible. Fixed cost does not mean that it is permanently fixed. No, fixed cost means that it does not increase because of units. It can increase because of any other reason. For example, what if, say, imagine what if I say that this is my data of year 1 and this is my data for year 2. Now, isn't it possible that my factory rent in year 2 might be more than factory rent of year 1? What if my rent agreement, what if the rent agreement in my company, the rent agreement which I have with the factory owner, with the landlord, says that every year the rent shall increase by 20%. If the rent agreement says 20% increase in rent every year, then definitely I need to increase my rent also here. If my year 1 rent paid was 20,000, then in year 2 I have to pay 20% more rent. So in year 2 I will have to pay rent of 24,000, 20% extra rent. Now you notice that year 1 rent is 20,000, year 2 rent is 24,000. You see that the fixed cost is also increasing. If the fixed cost is increasing like this, will I say that this rent is becoming variable cost? You notice that when 1000 units were produced, rent was 20,000, but now in second year, when I produce 1200 units, rent has become 24,000. So isn't the rent increasing with the increase in units? No. Please understand this. Although it seems that the rent is increasing, yes, it is increasing, but is it increasing because of the units? No. You see that my rent is increasing, yes. You see that the rent is increasing, but will I say it is increasing because of units? No. It is not increasing because of the units, rather it is increasing because of the change in year. Fixed cost can increase because of any other reason. Only thing is it will not increase because of units. Fixed cost will remain fixed for any increase in production, but it can increase for reasons other than production. Done? Yes, fixed cost can increase for reasons other than units production. Done? Acha. One more thing to notice here. Chalo. Taking this back to the original example. Assuming there are no other factors involved, if there is no other factors involved, then fixed cost will remain same 20,000. Also, if I convert this cost into per unit cost, in both the examples, let's see what happens. In case of variable cost, dekho, 2000 material cost divided by 1000 units gives me 22 per unit. And in the second level also, 2400 divided by 1200 units also gives me 2 per unit. So observation is that in case of variable cost, per unit remains constant. But in case of fixed cost, we'll see that per unit, in case of fixed cost, when I produce 1000 units, I had to pay rent of 20,000. So per unit rent turns out to be 20,000 divided by 1000. Per unit rent becomes 20. But when I produce 1200 units, I still pay a rent of same 20,000. I still pay rent of same 20,000. So my per unit rent is now 20,000 divided by 1200 is 16.67. So you notice that in case of fixed cost, per unit does not remain constant. However, in case of fixed cost, total remains constant. Yes, so I make one conclusion here. Conclusion that variable cost remains constant on per unit basis. Fixed cost remains constant on total basis. Done? I repeat, variable cost remains constant on per unit basis because in case of variable cost, total keeps increasing. While in case of fixed cost, total remains constant, per unit keeps decreasing. Why did that per unit fixed cost decrease? Naturally, it decreases because now the same rent, 20,000, same rent gets distributed over more number of units. Done? That is my second important observation. I'll write that here. Variable cost remains constant on per unit basis, while fixed cost remains constant on total basis. Done? Yes. Well, that is why whenever variable cost is expressed, it is always expressed in terms of per unit. If you ask me that how much material cost do I incur, I would say that my material cost is 2 per unit. If I'm manufacturing these pencils and you ask me that what is my material cost, naturally I will say that my material cost is 2 rupees per unit. But if you ask me that how much rent do I pay, will I say that my rent is 20 per unit? No. If you ask me that how much rent do I pay, I will say that my rent is 20,000. Fixed cost is never expressed on per unit basis. Yeah? Fixed cost should never be expressed on per unit basis. Fixed cost should always be expressed, should always be given on total basis. Clear? Yes. We'll also write that down here as a general conclusion. Fixed cost is always expressed on a total basis, meaning fixed cost should always be given in terms of total. However, if in some questions fixed cost is given on a per unit basis, then number of units should be given along with it. For example, if I tell you that my rent is 20 per unit, it doesn't make any sense. Basically, that doesn't make sense. If you ask me that, sir, how much rent do I pay for the premises? I tell you that my rent is 20 per student. Does that make sense? No. But if I say that my rent is 20 per unit when I produce 1000 units, if I say that my rent is 20 per unit when I produce 1000 units, now does it make sense? Yes. In fact, if I say that my rent is 20 per unit when I produce 1000 units, so you can do 20 into 1000 and identify total rent 20,000. Or I might tell you that my rent is 16.67 per unit when I produce 1200 units. Look, for fixed cost, per unit does not remain constant. So when I have to tell fixed cost to someone, I cannot tell it on per unit basis unless I tell it along with the units. So I make a new rule, one more rule here. Notice this is that if the fixed cost is given on per unit basis, then convert it into total fixed cost by multiplying that number of units for which this fixed cost is given. So if I tell you that my fixed cost is 20 per unit, then you multiply 1000 units. But if I tell you that my fixed cost is 16.67 per unit, then you multiply 1200 units. In short, you first convert that fixed cost per unit into fixed cost total. You convert the fixed cost rate per unit into the fixed cost total by multiplying that number of units for which the fixed cost is given. Done? Yes, this basic rule you have to apply whenever fixed cost appears on per unit basis. Done? Yes. So now this was my first discussion here, variable cost versus fixed cost. Clear? Yes. I'll give you a moment, finish writing that, then we cover up third category, semi-variable cost. Yes, first you finish writing this. Yes, done. Okay, now this was a basic revision, variable cost, fixed cost. Now the third category that I discuss here, which is quite famous now at final level, that is semi-variable cost. Now what does semi-variable cost mean? Semi-variable cost, which is also called as batch cost. Batch cost, I'll give you an example first, then accordingly let us define what is semi-variable cost. Example, say my example is pertaining to bus rent. Say for example, I'm planning a trip for all the students in my batch. Yes, there are total say 200 students in my batch, and I'm planning a trip for all the students together. Now to travel for the trip, to travel to the trip destination, I need a bus. I go to the travel agency and I talk to them regarding what will be the bus charges. Now they asked me that what is my destination. I said that this is a fixed destination. I want to go from our classes premises to this particular resort here for a picnic, just for example. Now the travel agency told me that the bus rent will be say this much. He told me that the bus rent will be rupees 1000 per bus. Imagine he is giving me a fixed rate per bus. So will I say this becomes a fixed cost? No. Why? Because the bus has a capacity. Say for example, the number of seats in a bus capacity is 50 seats. So at the most I can have 50 students sitting in one bus. Now total how much bus rent cost will I incur depends on how many students register for the picnic. Let's say example, so my units versus cost now might go like this. Units over here means number of students who register for the trip. If out of a class of 200 students, if out of my class of 200 students, if only 30 students register for the picnic, then what will be my bus rent cost? Well, if only 30 students register for the picnic, how many buses will I need? How many number of buses will I need? I will need only one bus, and one bus, I will need only one bus, and the rent for that one bus will be rupees 1000. Yes. Now if double students, if the number of students register becomes double, say 60 students register for the picnic. If 60 students want to join in the picnic, can I fit all 60 students in one bus? No. One bus has the maximum capacity of 50 seats theoretically. So theoretically I cannot fit 60 students in one bus. Yes, practically you might say that sir वो आ जाएंगे गोदी में बिठा लेंगे, but we will go for theoretically. Theoretically in one bus I cannot fit 60 students. So for 60 students I will need what? I will need two buses. And if I hire two buses, then my bus rent will become 1000 per bus. For two buses it will become 2000 rupees. So can I say that dekho, my cost is increasing with the increase in number of units? My cost is increasing with the increase in number of units. You see that when the units are increasing over here, then my cost is also increasing. So looking at this, will I say that the bus rent cost is a variable cost here? Well, no, it is not exactly a variable cost. Look at my example further. Now, if 90 students register for the trip, then for 90 students, how many buses will I need? Will I need 3 buses now? No. You see that the bus capacity is 50 seats. So in one bus, I can fit 50 students. So for 90 students, I will need still 2 buses only, because in 2 buses maximum how much can I fit? In 2 buses maximum 100 students I can fit. 90 students will fit within 2 buses. So for 90 students also my cost will remain same 2000, because 2 buses current will remain same 2000. So this time you notice that the units are increasing but the cost remains same. First time with the increase in units, cost increased. Second time with the increase in units, cost is still remaining the same. Well, this proves that my cost given here is neither a variable cost nor a fixed cost, because as per my first example, it seemed, as per 60 students example, it seemed that my cost is a variable cost. But now when I study for 90 students, it seems that my cost is a fixed cost. In reality, this cost is neither variable cost nor a fixed cost. I'd say it is a semi-variable cost. It is a batch cost. Batch cost. Think about this. How will this cost increase? Will I say that this cost is increasing with increase in every single unit? Well, if you look at the first 2 lines, it seems that the cost is increasing with every unit. But if you look at the third line here, no, the cost is not increasing with every increase in units. So how do I define this? Well, this type of cost, I name that as the batch cost. It is also called as semi-variable cost, but I will use the name batch cost, because the name semi-variable cost is many times wrongly used in other places also. So for my explanations, I will call such cost as a batch cost. Why? Because look at the definition. I say that this cost increases with what? It increases with increase in group of units, batch of units. Look at the difference. Variable cost increases with every extra unit. Fixed cost does not increase with any extra units. Semi-variable cost, does it increase with every extra unit? No. Does it never increase? No. Semi-variable cost, batch cost, increases with increase in group of units, batch of units. I'll write that down. Semi-variable cost increases with increase in group of units. Increases with increase in group of units, that is batch of units. That is why I name this as a batch cost. Done? Yes. To give you or to remind you some things from your childhood, if you remember, then graphically such type of cost you had already learnt. For example, if I give you a graph for fixed cost, how does the graph of fixed cost appear? Fixed cost graph will go like this. Fixed cost graph will be a straight line. This is called as fixed cost, where my fixed cost graph will be a straight line where x-axis is the units and y-axis is the cost. Then this straight line here indicates, yes, your fixed cost. What will be graph of variable cost? Variable cost will be an increasing line starting from 0. This can be your variable cost. Because it increases with increase in units, this becomes, yes, your variable cost. What about semi-variable cost? Semi-variable cost does not look like any of these items. Semi-variable cost will go like this. Semi-variable cost will start from a certain level. It will remain fixed up to certain number of units. Like here, my bus rent will be 1000 rupees for number of students up to 50. From 0 to 50 students, my bus rent will remain same 1000 rupees. Beyond 50 students, my bus rent will suddenly shoot up and become 2000 rupees. Now it will remain at 2000 rupees up to 100 students. Beyond 100 students, it will again shoot up and become 3000. It will remain at 3000 for up to 150 students. Then again, it will shoot up like this. This it becomes my graph of batch cost, semi-variable cost. Done? Yes, you need to differentiate all these nature of costs so that you can use them in your calculations. Clear? Yes. Okay. So this is my semi-variable cost called as batch cost. Finish writing that and then we go on. Yes, please. Done with that. Okay. Now this was one kind of semi-variable cost. Now, as per the ICAI language of questions, as per the question language in many of the papers, there is one more type of semi-variable cost that can come. Let's see. Semi-variable cost. Again, I am calling this as semi-variable cost. Look at my example. This time, say, look at this example. I say that when I produce 1000 units, then my cost is rupees 2000. So if I produce 1200 units, what should be the cost? Well, if I write down the cost over here as rupees 2400, then you will say that this is a variable cost. Why variable? We will say that this is variable cost because with the increase in units, cost is also increasing proportionately. Yes, this becomes a variable cost. Chalo, what if the cost that I give you here is not 2400? What if the cost that I give you here is same 2000? Now you will say that the cost is a fixed cost. You will say that with the increase in units, my cost is remaining same, equal. So this cost is a fixed cost. But now, what if I write like this? What if I write here that for 1200 units, my cost is 2300, not 2400. I say my cost is 2300. Will I say this is a fixed cost? Obviously not, because the cost is increasing. You notice that yes, with the increase in units, the cost is increasing. So can I say this is a variable cost? No. Why not variable? Because look, if this was a variable cost, then yes, the cost will increase, but it should increase proportionately. With the increase in units, my cost should increase proportionately. For 1000 units, if the variable cost is 2000, then for 1200 units, the variable cost should have been 2400. But I have written here 2300. This is not a variable cost also. Well, what does this mean? I'll tell you. If the cost is not a fixed cost, not a variable cost, meaning it is a semi-variable cost. But this is not the semi-variable cost like we did above here. No, I would say this is a semi-variable cost, which is basically total of fixed plus variable. The word total over here means simply variable cost plus fixed cost. The semi-variable cost, which is total, it is simply summation of variable cost and fixed cost together. Yes, so this kind of semi-variable cost, I'll say it is total of variable cost plus fixed cost. But let me tell you again that how did I conclude that this cost is total of fixed and variable? How did I conclude? Well, you remember the rules that I gave you. For fixed cost, total should remain constant. Here in this example, you notice that the total is not remaining constant. If the total does not remain a constant, I will say therefore it is not a fixed cost. Also remember, for a variable cost, per unit should remain constant. Let us convert this into per unit. Per unit cost, 2000 divided by 1000 is 2 per unit. And the second row, 2300 divided by 1200. 2300 divided by 1200, it is 1.916, 1.92 approximately. 1.92 per unit. So you notice that even per unit is not remaining constant. If the total is not constant, means it is not a fixed cost. If per unit is not constant, I'll say therefore it is not variable cost. Now if it is neither fixed cost nor variable cost, meaning it is summation of fixed plus variable, meaning it is summation of fixed plus variable, it is summation of fixed plus variable, that is total cost. Now if the question gives you total cost like this, then you cannot use this total cost in your analysis because you don't know how will the cost change. For example, if I ask you that what will be the cost for 1500 units, you cannot find that. You cannot find that unless you split the variable and fixed component separate out of the given cost. So if the given cost is a total of fixed and variable like this, if the given cost it is variable cost plus fixed cost, that is total cost, then you need to learn to separate variable and fixed component. And remember, how did you used to separate variable and fixed component? Well, I give you a method for that. I say therefore you apply a method which I name that as high-low method. You apply that high-low method, which is a method to split variable cost and fixed cost separate from the given total cost. Done? Yes. So you can split variable cost, fixed cost out of the total cost using the high-low method. Look what I have written here. These things that I have written here, this entire analysis shows that when should you apply high-low method. Next, what I am showing you is how to apply high-low method. Trust me, how to apply is the easier part. When to apply here, what we did here was the more important part, because in the question will not specifically tell you that you apply high-low method. You should understand, or it should strike you that you need to apply high-low method here. When will you apply high-low method? When to apply? Well, when to apply, this is the method, this is the rule, that if the given cost does not remain constant on a total basis, so it is not a fixed cost. If the given cost per unit does not remain a constant, so it is not a variable cost. So if it is neither fixed cost nor variable cost, then you need to apply high-low method. Done? Yes. So next, how to apply that high-low method? Notice here. So this was part A, when to apply. Now part B, how to apply. Well, how to apply, I'll give you two basic steps. Step 1, you calculate variable cost per unit like this. Imagine you see here that the units are increasing from 1000 to 1200. How much is the units increasing? Units is increasing by 200, and because of that 200 increase in units, cost is increasing. How much is the cost increasing? Cost is increasing by rupees 300. Now you know that, you see that this 2000, whether it is fixed or variable, I don't know. This 2300, contains how much fixed, how much variable, we don't know. But this 300 here is definitely only variable cost. How can you be so sure? How can I be so sure that this 300 is definitely only variable cost? Well, definitely I am sure, because only variable cost is the one which increases because of increase in units. Look, that 300 is the increase. It is extra cost. And it is extra cost because of this 300 is extra cost because of 200 extra units. Do you have extra fixed cost because of extra units? Never. So this extra cost is definitely because of only variable cost. So I can say that 300 is the extra variable cost because of 200 extra units. हो गया solve. देखो, if 300 is extra variable cost because of 200 extra units, so divide, it gives you per unit 300 divided by 200, it gives me 1.5 per unit is my variable cost per unit. Done? Yes. Let us make a formula out of that. What is 300? 300 I say is the difference in total cost, and 200 which I divide down is what? It is the difference in units. This makes my formula. Variable cost per unit is difference in total cost divided by difference in units gives you variable cost per unit. This variable cost per unit applies to all the levels. It applies to the low level units also. It applies to high level units also. Why does it apply to all units? Because variable cost per unit remains constant. If variable cost of these 200 extra units is 1.5, meaning variable cost of all the units here is same 1.5 per unit. I repeat, if variable cost of these 200 extra units is 1.5 per unit, then variable cost of all units at low level or all units at high level, all units variable cost is always 1.5 per unit, because variable cost per unit remains constant. Done. Now that I know the variable cost, using that you can identify the fixed cost also, like this. Fixed cost you always identify on total basis. Look at the difference. Variable cost I identified on per unit basis. Fixed cost you identify on a total basis. So fixed cost you identify on total basis, and the simplest way, easiest way to do that is you take the total cost minus the variable cost. Well, you can do that for any level. You can do that using the high level or using the low level. In any case, fixed cost that you get should come same. Let us check. Using the high level, at the higher level, your total cost is 2300 minus variable cost. At the higher level, your total cost is 2300 minus variable cost of that level. Of that level meaning 1.5 per unit into 1200 units, because at high level your units are 1200, variable cost is 1.5 per unit. So try that. 1.5 per unit into 1200 units, that is 1800, and 2300 minus 1800 gives you fixed cost of rupees 500. Or let us try that using the low level also. At the lower level, your total cost was 2000 minus variable cost 1.5 per unit for 1000 units, because at lower level units are 1000. 2000 minus 1500 also gives you 500. In short, any level you start with, your total fixed cost you get will be same 500. Done? Yes. In fact, now using these data, you can also answer the cost at any other level. So if I ask you, one thing extra, if I ask you to find the total cost for 2500 units level, what you were given in the question was the cost of 1000 units, 1200 units. What if I ask you to find the total cost for 2500, or better chalo 1500 units? If I ask you to find the total cost of 1500 units, all you have to do is take variable cost plus fixed cost. Variable cost will be 1.5 per unit for 1500 units, and fixed cost will remain fixed 500. Yes, so 1.5 into 1500 is 2250 plus 500 fixed cost 2750. So that gives you total cost of 2750. Done? Yes, this was not in the question. I'll say this was just extra. In short, this is how you apply high-low method. High-low method is applied for segregating, for separating variable cost and fixed cost out of the total cost. Clear? Yes, this was one of the revision from your intermediate level, but trust me, this will be required at many places in CA final also. I'll not say any specific chapter. These are all general calculations which are needed in many chapters together. Done? Yes. Okay, so copy that first, then we go on. Yes, we'll scroll. Yes, should be done. Okay, now these last two things that we learned, that is semi-variable cost, which is total of fixed and variable, and semi-variable cost, which is a batch cost. Well, in the question, how will you differentiate that which semi-variable cost is given? I discussed both of them together because in many of the ICAI questions, the question will just say that it is semi-variable cost. The question does not clarify whether it is batch level cost or whether it is total of fixed and variable. Look, the treatment of both is different. If it is the batch cost, if the semi-variable cost is of batch type, then for such cost, never apply high-low method. You never apply high-low method here, because in such case you don't need to apply high-low method. Why did you apply high-low method in my next case? Because when I ask you, what will be the total cost for 1500 units, to find that you need high-low method. But in the previous case, if I asked you, if I asked you that what will be the total cost for say 150 units, do you need to apply high-low method? No, you don't need to apply high-low method. Why? Because you know the bus capacity and you know the bus rent. So if I have 150 students joining in the trip, you can identify number of buses needed. If the bus capacity is 50 seats, then for 150 students, you know that you will need 3 buses, and for each bus rent is 1000, so you know that your bus cost will be rupees 3000. Yes or no? Yes. So how to differentiate? Remember this. If the question says that the cost is semi-variable cost, then general assumption is always that it is the semi-variable cost. which is total of fixed and variable, this type. So general assumption is that you always apply high-low method for semi-variable cost. However, if the semi-variable cost is given with the cost per batch, per bus means per batch, and the batch size, if the batch size or the batch cost is given, then it is not high-low method. Then I'll give you a note for that. Notice thus semi-variable cost can be number 1 batch cost, or number 2 total cost. Anything it could be, yes, but general assumption in general, your default assumption will be that semi-variable cost is equal to that number 2 total cost, therefore apply high-low method. Therefore apply high-low method. But if batch cost or batch size is given, if batch cost or batch size is given, then semi-variable cost is your batch cost, and in that case do not apply high-low method. Copy this note also. Yes, copy that rules. These rules will help you in many calculations further. Yeah. One more note you can write down like this. I say that in case of high-low method, you are taking difference in cost divided by difference in units. Which units should I take? Should I take difference of production units or should I take difference of sales units? Well, it depends on which cost are we trying to segregate. If the cost you are segregating is a production cost like factory overheads, then use production units in the denominator. So difference in total, difference in factory overheads divided by difference in production units you take. But if the cost that you are considering is a selling cost like selling overheads, then the units that you take should be the sales units, difference in total selling overheads divided by difference in the sold units. Yes, so when I am saying that in high-low method you divide the difference in units, which units will you divide depends on which cost are you talking about. If it is production related cost, you divide the difference in production units. If it is selling related cost, you divide difference in sales units. Done? Yes, put that also one note over here. Look, this covers majority of my revision pertaining to some basic calculations. Now next, we'll be going to one important revision from your intermediate level. Yes, listen to me first. At your intermediate level, you had a chapter called as overheads. You had an entire separate chapter called as overheads. What does overheads mean? Well, my next revision is to give you a better understanding of the term overheads, because based on what you learnt in overheads chapter, I need to remind you what you had learnt in activity based costing. Activity based costing is a principle which is an advanced form of overheads only. Yes, you already had activity based costing in your intermediate level, but trust me, it is more of a CA final topic. Many chapters of CA final are basically CA final chapters, but at the base it involves the methods that you learn in activity based costing. So the method of calculation which you did in activity based costing, that same method is applicable at many places in CA final. But my job is not just to give you the method of calculation. That is not enough. At your intermediate level, you might have learnt the method of calculation in activity based costing. I need to make you realize not just the method of calculation. What I want to make you realize is the actual meaning of activity based costing. I want to make you realize that this method of activity based costing is such a brilliant method. It is so much better than the normal overheads method. So my next revision is revising what is your overheads method, what is activity based costing method. But before that, why do we have these methods? Yes, that is my next discussion. You can call that as note number 4. Notice, in case of the cost sheet, whatever format we learned in the cost sheet, this format of cost sheet that we learned, notice in this format of cost sheet, you have 3 types of overheads coming in. You have 3 types of overheads here. Factory overheads you have here. Then admin overheads you have here. And later you had selling and distribution overheads. But the overheads which are shown in the cost sheet, it is never shown directly on total basis. The overheads which are shown in the cost sheet, it is always presented in the form of some kind of rate. That rate is called as absorption rate. You notice even in this question 1 that we already did, your factory overheads, were you given the total factory overheads 4,500? Did the question give you 4,500? No. What the question gave you was 50% of direct labor. So the factory overheads given in the question is given in the form of rate. Similarly, the admin overheads given in the question was also given in the form of rate, 20% of factory cost. Also, selling overheads given in the question was given in the form of a rate, 0.5 per unit. That rate is called as budgeted absorption rate. Factory overheads are always expressed in terms of budgeted absorption rate. The overheads, all overheads that appear in a cost sheet is always based on budgeted absorption rate. Look, I need you to listen to me first, understand everything that I tell you here. Later, I will give you time only, then you start writing. This is important. I don't want you to waste time in writing while I'm explaining. Listen carefully. So, the overheads appearing in a cost sheet is based on budgeted absorption rate. But why do I make budgeted absorption rate? This rate is made mainly for adding overheads to the product cost. Overheads are added to the product cost using budgeted absorption rate. Now when I say product cost, that is cost of production. So overheads are added to the product cost, to the cost of production, using a rate called as budgeted absorption rate. Why? Why? Well, because overhead cost is an indirect cost. Indirect. Overheads are always indirect cost, and because it is indirect, it is not directly related to this product. As it is not directly related to this product, it is therefore not easy to identify for that product. Say if I am manufacturing this product, then I need to decide selling price of this product. I need to decide selling price of the product, and to decide selling price of the product, I need to identify cost of the product. My cost of the product, say, involves only three components: direct material, direct labor, and overheads. Now direct material, direct labor, both of them are direct cost. Direct because it is directly related to the product. Now if it is directly related to this product, then it is easy to identify. Because it is direct, it is therefore easy to identify that for 1 unit of this product, how much material do I incur, how much labor do I incur. Yes, it is easy to identify. It can be easily identified that for 1 unit of my product, material cost is, say, 10 per unit. It is easy to identify that for 1 unit, my direct labor is rupees 8 per unit, for example. Why is it easy to identify? It is easy because it is directly related to this product. But overheads is indirect, not directly related to the product. Example, overhead cost example, rent. Now if I am manufacturing these pencils, I can easily identify that how much material cost is incurred for 1 unit. I can identify easily that how much is the direct labor that I pay for 1 unit. But I cannot easily identify that what is my factory rent that I pay for 1 unit. Why not easy? Because factory rent is not paid for 1 unit directly. Even say machine lubrication is factory overheads. Can I identify that how much lubrication did I use? How much lubrication did I incur for producing 1 unit of this product? No. So even lubrication cost, machine lubrication is my overheads. It is not easy to identify that how much is incurred for 1 unit because it is not easy to identify. Hence, how will I add it to my product cost here? Overheads is added to product cost here. Overhead is added to product cost here based on a budgeted absorption rate. Overheads are added to the product cost by creating a budgeted absorption rate. How do I make that budgeted absorption rate? Say for example, if my total rent of the entire factory for the entire year, my total rent for the entire year is estimated rupees 2 lakhs, is my estimated rent of the entire year, and along with that I also estimate the total number of units that I will produce. 2 lakhs is the total rent. 1 lakh is, say for example, the total units which I expect to make. Yes, then 2 lakhs divided by 1 lakh units gives me rupees 2 per unit. This 2 rupees per unit will be the rate that I can use for adding overheads in my product cost. This rate is called as budgeted absorption rate. How did I make the rate? Dekho, how did I make the rate? If I give you a formula, budgeted absorption rate is simply budgeted overheads divided by the budgeted base. Budgeted overheads divided by budgeted units, budgeted base gives you the budgeted absorption rate. This rate is the rate by which I am adding overheads to the product cost. So accordingly, 2 rupees per unit is my overheads that I consider in my product cost, and accordingly I get my total product cost as 20. On this cost I add a profit of 5 rupees, gives me a selling price of 25 per unit. Done. Yes, when do I do this calculation? When is all this calculation done? Well, this entire calculation is done at the all these workings are done at the beginning of the year. Naturally, because selling price I have to identify at the beginning of the year. Because this is done at the beginning of the year, that is why at the beginning of the year, do I know what is going to be my total overheads? No. It is purely budget, meaning estimate. At the beginning of the year, do I know what is going to be my total units? No. It is purely a budget, estimate. Now, by the end of the year, if any of these budget goes wrong, if my estimates go wrong, meaning my rate will go wrong, meaning the overheads which I have added in the product cost has gone wrong. Well, if that happens, then it will lead to something called as under absorption, over absorption. Tell me, do these words sound familiar to you? If you've done that in your intermediate level, hopefully these words are sounding familiar to you. This is just a revision. Done? Yes. Acha. Now, while creating the budgeted absorption rate, I took budgeted overheads divided by budgeted base. Now, that base that I am using here can have different options. The base that I am using here can have different options. Either I can take base of units, or I can take base of hours, or I can take base of some cost. The base that I take might be the base of some units, or might be I can take the base of hours, or I can take base of cost. If I take units as the base, then the rate which I get will be per unit. If I take hours as the base, then the rate which I get will be rupees per hour. But if I take cost as the base, then the rate which I get will be percentage of the cost. Example. What if I say that my budgeted overheads is 2 lakhs and budgeted units are 1 lakh, then my rate I get here is 2 rupees per unit. But let me change. What if I don't take the base of units, I take the base of hours? Maybe 1 lakh is my production units, but one unit requires half hour for production. 1 unit requires half an hour for production. So 1 lakh units will require how many hours for production? 1 lakh units will require 50,000 production hours. I'll take 2 lakhs divided by 50,000 hours. 2 lakhs divided by 50,000 hours, if you do, gives you rupees 4 per hour is your absorption rate. This 4 per hour absorption rate you can then use to find product cost over here. You can then find product cost like this, that my overhead cost is rupees 4 per hour, but 1 unit requires half hour. 4 per hour into half an hour will give you again 2 per unit. Done? Yes, this is my absorption rate, which is made in terms of per hour. Sometimes you might also have absorption rate which is not per hour, but rather it is based on some cost. Say for example, my budgeted overheads is 2 lakhs and my budgeted base that I take is say the labor cost. Yes. Say my total labor cost of the entire company is rupees 8 lakhs direct labor cost. Then budgeted overheads 2 lakhs, divide by 8 lakhs. If you do 2 lakhs divide by 8 lakhs, technically, mathematically, it gives you 0.25. But this is not rupees 0.25 per labor or per kg or per unit. It is rather, I would say, it is rupees 0.25 per watt. Per watt. Look, if I divide units, then my answer is per unit. If I divide hours, then my answer was rupees per hour. But if I divide cost, then my answer is rupees 0.25 per rupee of direct labor. But in better way, I will say this is 25% of direct labor cost. So if my labor cost is 1 rupee, if my labor cost is 100 rupees, then my overhead cost will be 25 rupees. For every 100 rupee of labor cost, my overhead cost will be 25 rupees. This means my overheads is 25% of labor cost. In short, these are different ways of expressing the budgeted absorption rate. Your absorption rate might be expressed in terms of per unit, might be expressed in terms of per hour, or might be expressed as a percentage of cost. In fact, you saw these examples in question 1. Notice, in your question 1, your factory overheads was given as percentage of direct labor. Your admin overheads was given as a percentage of factory cost, but your selling overheads was given in terms of per unit. All of that are different forms of expressing the absorption rate. That is what you had learnt in your intermediate level under the overheads chapter. Done? Yes? Yeah. Copy that. That is your overheads chapter revision. Look, in your overheads chapter, you had also learnt apportionment, reapportionment, allocation, and all that. Well, all that I am not revising. It is not needed. This is directly the last step called absorption. Yes. Copy that. That is your overheads revision. I also add a note regarding under absorption that we discussed. Please finish writing that, then you can take a short tea break. After that, we start with the more important concept called activity based costing. Yes, take a short tea break. Like I told you in my last session, 5 to 7 minutes you can take a break. For the break, you need to pause the video because I will not wait long. I will be continuing, but you can pause the video after copying this, then we'll continue with the new topic. But please be sure to be back and continue playing within 5 minutes. Yes, please. Welcome back. We'll continue. Okay, now this was my entire revision regarding overheads. But what we need to now better learn is a more better method of adding overheads to product cost. This was your original method of adding overheads to product cost. Let me call this original method as the traditional absorption costing method. Absorption costing method where my overhead cost is added to the product cost using it is added to product cost using this budgeted absorption rate. But now I give you some more methods of doing this. Yes, so to understand some more methods, I'll first create one example here. Notice this example. Currently what we have done is that I took budgeted overheads divided by budgeted base like ours gives me the budgeted absorption rate. Let's say in my company, for example, my company has two production departments, P1 and P2. Say for example, I am manufacturing this marker pen, I'm manufacturing this pencil, and to manufacture this pencil there are two departments involved. One is the, say, molding department, other is the assembling department. Say P1 is my molding department and P2 is the assembling department. Molding department is the one where all these different plastic parts are molded. Molded means all the different plastic parts are created, and then in the assembling department these different plastic parts are assembled together to make the final product. Yes, so molding department, assembling department are my two main production departments. Now within each department I have overheads incurred. Say the molding department has total budgeted overheads of rupees 1 lakh. Assembling department has total budgeted overheads of rupees 2 lakhs. Yes, budgeted hours in department P1, my budgeted hours is, say for example, 10,000 hours, and department P2 has total budgeted hours of 5,000 hours. So accordingly, if I make the absorption rate, department P1 shows absorption rate of rupees 10 per hour, while in department P2, 2 lakhs divided by 5,000 gives me absorption rate of 40 per hour. Yes, these absorption rates I will use for adding overheads to my product cost. Yes, so in my company, if I am producing two types of products, product A, product B, say product A is this plastic pencil, product B is say some other plastic components. Yes, say product A is the plastic pencils, product B is say plastic other components, say plastic box I'm manufacturing. Now one product might require more molding, less of assembling. Other product might require more of assembling, less of molding. Possible? Yes. Maybe my first product is spending more time in molding department. Product A requires more time in molding department, less time in assembling department. But product B is a product which is difficult to assemble. So product B requires more assembling time. Now you notice here that my molding department is costing 10 rupees per hour. Assembling department has overhead cost of 40 rupees per hour. So assembling department is a more expensive department. Okay. Accordingly, these are my absorption rates which I will use for adding overheads to my product cost. Done? Yes. Acha. Chalo, instead of this method, what if I make it more easier, more simpler that I will not segregate my overheads between P1 and P2. Look, if I wanted to distribute overheads between P1 and P2, that distribution, this overheads distribution between P1 and P2 was done by using those steps, by using allocation, apportionment, reapportionment. After doing all that, you could segregate overheads between the departments. It was very time consuming. Instead, chalo, I decide not to segregate my overheads between P1 P2. What if I identify overheads without segregating department wise? I identify overheads directly on total basis, total overheads of the entire company. Well, total overheads of the entire company will therefore turn out to be 3 lakhs without segregating. Total budgeted hours of the entire company, total hours of all departments, entire company, total hours will therefore be 15,000 hours, say labor hours, machine hours, whatever. Yes, so total overheads divided by total hours gives you 3 lakhs divided by 15,000, it gives you rate of 20 per hour. Now I show you here that there are two methods of making the absorption rate. I see here that there are two methods of making absorption rate. Let me name them. This, I call this as method 1, where my absorption rate is made for the entire company as a whole. Single rate for the entire company. Single absorption rate for entire company. It is called as the single rate method, or also called as the blanket rate method. Single or blanket rate method. Blanket rate method because one single rate covers all departments, all products like a blanket. It is called as blanket rate method or single rate method. But what you see on this side here, left side here, where I calculate rate for P1, P2 separately, this becomes my second method of creating absorption rate. I call that as department wise rate method. That becomes my department wise rate method. You tell me which is a better method. When I say better, does not mean easier. When I say better, means the which method will give me a better cost estimate, better estimate of product cost. Naturally, department wise rate is a more accurate, more better estimate of cost it will give. Why? Because imagine if I have two products, one product is using more of the molding department, other product is using more of the assembling department. Product A requires more molding time, product B requires more assembling time. Then which product should have more cost? You see that molding department is costing less, it is a cheaper department. Assembling department is a more expensive department. If different departments have different cost, it is always better to have separate rate for each department. If I have a single rate for all departments, it will not give me a very accurate estimate of cost. Naturally, yes, if I use a single rate method, meaning whether I'm using molding department or whether my product uses assembling department, in any case I'm adding overheads as 20 per hour. So basically it will become over costing for molding department and it will be under costing for assembling department. In short, conclusion is that department wise rate is always better than having single rate for entire company. Do you accept that? Yes. Now if you accept that, then I take this discussion little more further. Like instead of having single rate for department P1, I can give you some more details over here. Instead of having single rate for department P1, what if I say that within department P1, there are two types of machines. My molding department P1 contains two different types of machines, machine M1 and M2. So there are two different types of machines, M1 and M2. Maybe like one is automatic machine and one is a manual machine. Yes, maybe one is the automatic machine, one is a manual molding machine. Say M1, for example, is automatic molding and M2 is manual human operated machine. Now, depending on the product, I have to choose which machine will I use. Say, if there are two machines within department P1, let us also split the overhead cost between M1 and M2. The overhead cost of P1 is further divided between machines inside P1. Say out of 1 lakh rupees total overheads of department P1, say for example, rupees 60,000 pertains to M1 and rupees 40,000 pertains to M2. Similarly, out of total labor hours in department P1, my hours are also split between M1 and M2. Out of total labor hours 10,000, how many hours were used in M1? Well, out of total 10,000 hours, only 2,000 hours were used on M1. Because M1 is automatic machine, it will require lesser labor hours. But M2 is a manual operated machine, it will require more workers, more labor hours. So M2 machine requires 8,000 labor hours. Total 10,000, it matches. Yes. So accordingly, see, you can make separate absorption rate for M1 and M2. I can make a separate absorption rate for M1. My machine M1 is costing rupees 60,000 divided by 2,000, that is 30 per hour. While machine M2 is costing 40,000 divided by 8,000, that is 5 per hour. So same logic will apply again, that instead of having single rate, instead of having one common rate for entire department P1, isn't it better to have separate rate for machine M1, machine M2? Because some products might use the automatic machine, some products might use the manual machine. So if my product is using automatic machine, it will cost 30 rupees per hour. But if my product is using manual machine, it will cost 5 rupees per hour. Yes or no? Yes. So accordingly, accordingly my product cost should be different. Well, this method of making absorption rate machine wise, this method also you have learnt in your intermediate level. This method of making machine wise absorption rate was called as machine hour rate method. That is also you had done in your intermediate level. So my third method of making absorption rate was machine hour rate method, where absorption rate is made machine wise, separate absorption rate for each separate machine. Yes, this means that instead of having single absorption rate for all machines within department P1, it is better to have separate absorption rate for different machines in P1, because different machines might have different cost. It will give you a more accurate cost estimate. Done? Yes, these all three methods you have learnt in your intermediate level within the overheads chapter. Now I take this one more level up. I take this discussion one more level up. Say now I tell you that instead of having single rate, for machine M1, within machine M1 I might split that into more categories. Say for example machine M1, that same machine can be used for more than one types of work. It can be used for more than one type of work. It can be used for more than one activities. That same machine can be used for activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. It can perform 3 different types of activities. Example, you've seen these printing machines, the that big printing machines which are like multi-function printers. Yes, these machines are not just a printer. That same machine can be used as a printer, same machine can be used as a Xerox machine, same machine can be used as simply a scanner also. So that same machine is a scanner, Xerox and printing machine, scanner, copier and printer. So that same machine can perform 3 different activities. Now if it can perform 3 different activities, is it necessary that for every activity the cost is the same 30 rupees per hour? If I use that machine for 1 hour for printing, or if I use that machine for 1 hour for only scanning, will the cost incurred be same? No, because printing will consume electricity as well as ink. Scanning will consume only electricity, no ink is consumed. Cost cannot be same. Yes, so my next concept now says that instead of having single rate for the entire machine, you have separate rate for each activity done by the machine. Listen to my words. Separate rate for each activity done by the machine. Well, if you do that, if you can do that, separate rate for each activity done by the machine, then that will be called as my fourth method, activity based costing. It means that you make a separate rate for each activity done by the machine. Let me write that here. For separate rate for each activity done by the machine. Well, this will be the most accurate method of adding overheads to product cost. As you saw, देखो, look at the flow here. Look at the flow here, that having separate rate for each department was better than having single rate for entire company. Similarly, having separate rate for each machine was better than having single rate for all machines together. Similarly, having separate rate for each activity of the machine is better than having single rate for all the work of the machine. In fact, the more the bigger benefit of activity based costing is that not just you have a separate rate, but each of these separate rate will have separate base also. It will have separate base because all my activities might not depend on hours. Like the cost of printing does not depend on hours of printing. Cost of printing will depend on number of copies printed. Cost of scanning will depend on number of hours, or rather number of minutes taken for scanning. So my activity 1 might be based on number of copies, activity 2 might be based on hours, activity 3 might be based on again something else. So the base will be different in every activity. That is the main beauty of activity based costing. Separate rate for each activity done by each machine. Done? Yes. Now one word I will change over here. As such, in this meaning, the wordings that I've written here has one mistake. Now let me change and rectify that mistake. Well, I've written here that activity based costing is meaning that you make separate rate for each activity done by the machine. I'll make one change there. Instead of writing separate rate for each activity done by machine, I'll say separate rate for each activity done in the company. What's the difference? It means that activities are not segregated from machines. No. Rather, activities are segregated from the total company. Activities are segregated from the total company, meaning this 3 lakh rupees total overheads of the entire company. Out of that total 3 lakhs, you identify which all are the different activities involved in the company. Look, that 3 lakhs is the total overheads of the company. That 3 lakhs might involve many activities. That 3 lakh will involve many items of cost. Items like factory rent, machine lubrication, machine setup cost, or say ordering cost, transportation cost. There might be so many different items of cost in that 3 lakhs. Activity based costing means that you make a separate absorption rate for each separate item of cost. Separate absorption rate for every single item of cost. Yes, it will become a huge working. If my total overheads contains 100 different items of cost, then activity based costing says that you make a separate absorption rate for each of those 100 items of cost. Mainly because all those 100 items of cost will not depend on hours. My traditional method here, my traditional methods, this method or even machine or rate method, these 3 methods are my traditional method. These traditional methods assume that all my overheads are based on hours. Well, that is not true. All my overheads might not be based on hours. My machine setup cost has nothing to do with the production hours. My ordering cost has nothing to do with the production hours. So the main principle behind activity based costing is that activity based costing believes that all my overheads will not be based on hours. You identify separate absorption rate for each different item of cost which is not based on hours. So what you have to do is, out of total overheads 3 lakhs, you identify every single component of cost which is not depending on production hours, and you make a separate rate for each such item of cost. Separate rate for each example of cost, each item of overheads. That is my activity based costing. So if I'm making a separate absorption rate for printing cost, scanning cost and copying cost, if I'm making a separate absorption rate for printing cost, it is not just printing cost of machine 1. It will be printing cost of any machine in the company. Hence, I'm not identifying printing activity within machine M1. No, I identify printing activity within the entire company. So whether printing is done in machine M1 or machine M2 or machine M30, throughout my entire company, wherever printing is done, it will have the same rate. What do you calculate here? Throughout my entire company, wherever Xerox copying is done, photocopy is done, it will have the same rate as you calculate over here. In my entire company, whichever machine does scanning work will always involve same rate as you calculate over here. In short, you identify separate rate for each activity done in the company, not each activity done by the machine. That is my basic background for activity based costing. Done. This was just a basic background. Now based on this background, we will formally define what is activity based costing. I will differentiate how is it different from traditional method, and we will learn how to calculate things under activity based costing. Done. Yes. Within chapter 1, all my remaining questions given in the book are regarding activity based costing. I'm giving more questions for activity based costing because you should realize this is important at final level. Also, although this is intermediate level topic, some of you have not even done this topic because you did intermediate in old syllabus. For those of you who did intermediate in a new syllabus, yes, you have done this topic. The questions also that I have given are mostly same from intermediate level. But trust me, you need this revision because many questions of final level have the same methods of working to be done. Yes. And as I said, my purpose is not just to explain you method of activity based costing. My next example, I will make you realize that why is activity based costing method much better than the traditional method in my next example. Yes. First, I need you to copy this. Copy this full example that explains some things about activity based costing. Copy that first. Yes, we'll scroll. Excuse me. Yes, please. Done with that. Okay. Now, based on this background, I have written some theories about activity-based costing. Notice that. Just read out. Later, I'll give you time, then you copy. Just wait. Right now, we'll understand. I've already told you this. I say that activity-based costing means different rate for each activity in the company, not different rate for each activity in a machine, but different rate for each activity in the company. This means that you make a separate absorption rate for each item of cost, and each such rate can have different base. So all my absorption rates are not taking hours as the base. All absorption rates are not taking units as the base. Different absorption rates might take different things as the base. Traditional method had a problem that it assumes all overheads are based on hours. But in reality, all my overheads might not be based on hours. Like out of total 3 lakh overheads of the company, that 3 lakhs might contain many examples of cost. That 3 lakhs might contain rent expense, might contain say material ordering expenses, it might contain say machine setup preparation expenses. Yes, so all my expenses might not be based on hours. That is the main reason why we have activity based costing. So traditional method assumes all overheads are based on hours. So traditional method makes absorption rate always based on hours. It assumes that the product which takes more time, it involves more overheads. Traditional method assumes that the product which takes more production time will always have more overhead cost. In reality, that might not be true. Activity-based costing method, ABC method, rectifies this mistake. Well, what is the mistake? We'll understand that with one example. Notice this example here. I'm creating one example to explain you that what is the mistake in traditional method, and it will also explain you that how does ABC method rectify that mistake. That is why ABC method is a better method than a traditional method. Look, you might remember how to do calculation under ABC method, but that is not very important. What is more important is the concept of activity based costing. What is more important is that why is activity based costing better than the traditional method? This answer, why, the answer to the question why, is very much useful in our analysis part. I've told you at CA final level, analysis, interpretation, comments, recommendation, all that is more important. You can give better analysis if you properly, deeply understand that why is ABC method better than the traditional method. We'll see that here. Say I have two products, product A, product B, and I'm giving you some details about these products. Say for product A, product B, total production units required is same for both. I need 1000 units of A and 1000 units of B is my production required. Now I'm also giving you hours per unit. 1 unit of product A, 1 unit of product A requires 6 hours of production time. 1 unit of product B requires 4 hours of production time. For example, 1 unit of A requires 6 hours of production, 1 unit of B requires 4 hours of production. This is the hours details given. So you notice that product A takes more time for production. It takes more production time. Yeah. Now I'm also giving you general details like total budgeted overheads of my company is rupees 1 lakh. Total budgeted overheads is given 1 lakh, and using this I need to identify overhead cost of product A, product B. I want to add overhead cost to product A, product B. Let me call this as example 1, in which we will learn traditional method. So for traditional method, these are the only details which I need. Using these details, chalo, let us identify first the budgeted absorption rate. My budgeted absorption rate is total budgeted overheads divided by total budgeted hours. Total budgeted overheads rupees 1 lakh divided by total budgeted hours. Now total budgeted hours will be what? Well, 1 unit of A requires 6 hours per unit. You want to produce 1000 units, so 6000 hours you will need for product A, and product B 4 hours per unit into 1000 units, 4000 units you need for product B. Total hours of the company will therefore become 10,000 hours. Total hours of the company becomes 10,000 hours, so my absorption rate becomes rupees 10 per hour. 1 lakh divided by 10,000, 10 per hour becomes my absorption rate. Now using this absorption rate, I will identify overhead cost of A and B. Yes, so now if I identify product cost, for product A and product B, we don't know direct material, direct labor. Okay, let us identify only overhead cost. So for product A, product B, what will be my overhead cost? Product A overhead cost will be rupees 10 per hour for 6 hours, that is 60 rupees. And product B overhead cost will be accordingly rupees 10 per hour for 4 hours, that is 40 rupees. Yes, you notice that product A takes more time, so more overheads are given to product A. Then this is what you do under traditional method. Now for activity based costing method, let me give you more details. Look, with the same details I cannot apply activity based costing method. For ABC method I need more details in the question. So for more details in the question, I create example 2. Just write a conclusion here. Therefore product A has more cost because it takes more hours. Yep. Now example 2. Consider example 2 is a continuation of example 1. So in example 2, for ABC method, I give you further details. I give you further details in example 1. Total units required was already given. I'll keep it same, 1000 and 1000. Hours per unit was also given. I'll keep it same, 6 hours and 4 hours per unit. But now I give you some more other details also. Other details like this, say I also give you number of orders, number of purchase orders, let me say. Say for example, the material which is used in product A, material which is used for manufacturing product A is a normal regular material, long lasting material. It has a very long life of the material. So for product A, the material which I purchase materials only once in a month. One time in a month I purchase the material for product A, keep it in my stock and use it throughout the month. Yes, so for product A, my number of purchase order in the year is 12 times because monthly orders I make. However, for product B, the material which I use, say that product B material is a perishable material. Perishable. So I cannot order it once in a month in a bulk. No. For product B, the material is perishable. I need to order fresh every day. So number of orders that I will make will be every day. If I make daily orders for material of product B, if I order materials on a daily basis, then my number of purchase orders in the year will be around 360 orders. 5 days Diwali vacation. So 360 will be number of orders, number of purchase orders that I make for materials of product B, but for product A, my number of orders are only 12. Done? Possible? Yes, possible. Yes. Chalo, some more details I give you. I also tell you the batch size. Both these products are manufactured in batches. Production is done in batches. So my batch size basically means units per batch. But product A is more difficult to produce. If product A, because product A is maybe more difficult to produce, so in case of product A, okay, let me put it other way around. Say product A is very easy to produce so that in case of product A, I can keep a larger batch size, say 100 units per batch I can manufacture, because in one batch at one shot I can produce 100 units. Look, the batches over here indicate that once I switch on the machine, then after switching on, this machine can at a stretch produce 100 units. After 100 units, I need to switch off the machine and start a new batch. So in one batch, I can produce 100 units for product A, but in product B, it is more complicated. Product B is more complicated. So because of that, product B, I can produce only 10 units per batch. After every 10 units, I need to set the machine again. Maybe that is because of the design of product B is such. Yes, so that gives me my batch size. Now, if these are the further details, chalo, some more further details I give you. I also tell you that out of the total overheads, that I had given rupees 1 lakh. Now I say that this total budgeted overheads contains only 2 items of cost. Example. Actually, it might contain hundreds of items of cost, but just for my example, I say that this total budgeted overheads, say for example, it contains only 2 items of cost like these. This total budgeted overheads contains 2 types of cost. One is a material ordering cost, and other is machine setup cost. Say out of 1 lakh rupees total budgeted overheads, my material ordering cost is say rupees my material ordering cost is rupees 37,200 out of 1 lakh, and my machine setup cost is rupees 62,800 balancing. So I say that my total overheads cost contains only 2 components, material ordering cost and machine setup cost, just for example. So now tell me, do you think that any of these 2 costs actually depend on production hours? Look, my traditional method considered that if product A takes more hours, so it was given more overheads. But tell me, does the material ordering cost depend on the production time that you take? No. Does the machine setup cost depend on the production time that you take? No. What is material ordering cost? Material ordering cost might be like say transportation cost for getting the material, cost of making a purchase order, cost of checking the quality of material when the materials are received. Yes, all these are related to my material ordering cost. And machine setup cost. Machine setup cost depends on the number of times you have to set up the machine. Say every time when I start a new batch of production, every time I start a new batch of production, I have to set up the machine. Every time I start a new session of recording here, I have to set up the laptop, I have to set up the camera, I have to set up the TV and everything. That is called as my setup cost. Yes, so my machine setup cost will be incurred based on production hours? No, it will be incurred based on number of times I set up. Say if I set up the laptop and the camera and everything in my studio, once the setup is done, after the setup is done, whether I take 2 hours class or 5 hours class, doesn't matter. I don't incur extra setup cost. I will incur extra setup cost if I do more number of setups. Yes or no? So you notice that my material ordering cost depends on depends on number of orders. My machine setup cost depends on number of machine setups, number of times I have to set up the machine. Well, how many times will I have to set up the machine? I need to set up the machine every time when I start a new batch of production. Every time when I start a new batch of production, I have to set up the machine. Yes or no? Yes. Well, that is why I can say that if it depends on number of setups, that is, I can say it depends on number of batches. Now you see that in your production, you are supposed to produce 1000 units of A and 1000 units of B. Total units that you need to produce is the same. But for producing these 1000 units of A, I need to make only 12 purchase orders. But for producing 1000 units of B, I need to make 360 purchase orders. So which product do you think will have more ordering cost? If my ordering cost depends on number of orders, not the number of units, not the hours per unit, it depends on number of times I make a purchase order. Which product involves more number of purchase orders? Product B involves more number of purchase orders, so product B will involve more ordering cost. Yes or no? Similarly, my machine setup cost depends on number of batches that I produce. Well, if I have written batch size over here and you have the units required here, so you can identify, therefore, number of batches. For product A, I want to produce 1000 units, but in one batch I can produce only 100 units. So how many number of batches will I need for 1000 units? I will need 10 batches. If one time setup of the machine can produce 100 units, then for 1000 units, I need to set up the machine 10 times. But in product B, if one time setup of the machine can produce only 10 units, then for producing 1000 units, I will have to set up the machine 100 times. If my batch size is 10 units, then for 1000 units, you need 100 batches. So you notice that product B is the one which involves more number of purchase orders. Same product B also involves more number of batches. And you see that my overheads are actually not based on hours. Majority of my overheads are based on number of orders and the number of batches. If that is the case, then don't you think that out of product A, product B, which product should have more overhead cost? As per traditional method, we concluded that product A has more cost because it takes more time. But now you realize that just because product A takes more time does not necessarily mean that it should be given more cost. Product A, although it is using more production time, it is using less number of orders. It is using less number of batches also. So at least ordering cost and the setup cost will be less in product A. Product B should involve more overheads that you will get only if you follow activity based costing method. Activity based costing method says that overheads are not distributed based on hours. Overheads will be distributed based on what? Overheads will be distributed based on different factors. My ordering cost will be distributed based on a number of orders. The product which has more number of orders will be given more of the ordering cost. My setup cost will be distributed based on number of setups. The product which has more number of setups will be given more of the setup cost. In my example here, in both the cases, product B is the case. In both the items here, product B has more overheads. Product B is using more number of orders. Product B is requiring more number of setups. So accordingly, therefore, product B requires more number of orders and more number of setups. If product B involves more number of orders, more number of setups, therefore product B must be given more overhead cost. Because you notice that in this example, none of my overheads are actually based on hours. Traditional method assumes that all overheads are based on hours, but you see that my overheads here are not based on hours. That was the mistake in traditional method. So the mistake in traditional method was that it assumes all overheads are based on hours. Actually, all overheads are not based on hours. ABC method says that you distribute overheads based on the actual factor on which it is depending. Done? Yes, this is the benefit of activity based costing method. Next we will learn how is activity based costing done. This is not showing you how is the calculation done. This is just showing that the working you did in traditional method was wrong. Done? That is what my example 2 proves over here. Clear? Yes. Okay. This was a very important discussion. So I need you to copy that also. Then we will get into the actual calculations of ABC method. Yeah. First you copy this. Then we learn calculations under ABC method. Yes, we'll scroll. Yes, we'll scroll. Yes, we'll scroll. When I scroll, if you are not yet done with the writing, you can always pause the video to finish writing. Okay, we'll go on. Now, now based on that basic logic, let us now get into the calculation part. Look, for calculation part, your activity based costing method is pretty much similar to the traditional method. Like in the traditional method, you calculate a budgeted absorption rate like this. You calculate the rate by taking budgeted overheads divided by budgeted base. Base is mostly the hours. Only difference is now that under activity based costing method, you will still calculate a rate, but the rate will be calculated separately for each activity. So in a traditional method, you calculate budgeted absorption rate like this. For entire company, single rate for entire company. What you calculate is generally single rate for entire company as a whole, while under activity based costing method you will do rate calculation in the same way, but it will be separate rate for each item of cost. But this time your wordings will be a little different. Notice the wordings that we now use. The wordings that we use will go like this. Budgeted absorption rate is now called different. The budgeted absorption rate is now named as cost driver rate. You need to remember these names. It is now named as the cost driver rate. Calculation of that cost driver rate is also same way. It is budgeted overheads divided by budgeted base. But now budgeted overheads is named like this. Budgeted overheads is now named as activity cost pool. Cost pool, pool means collection. It is a collection of cost activity wise, because now your budgeted overheads will be collected activity wise, not for the entire company as a whole. It will be collected for each activity. So the total cost of each activity will be called as activity cost pool and divided by base. You know that this time the base for every activity is not ours. For every activity there will be different base. That different base is called as cost driver. The different base is called as cost driver. It is called cost driver because this is the factor which drives the cost. For example, my material ordering cost is driven by number of orders. More number of orders, more material ordering cost you will incur. My machine setup cost will be driven by, it is driven by number of times I set up the machine. More number of times I set up the machine, more will be the setup cost. Done? Yes, that base is now called as the cost driver. And look, the most important and interesting thing about activity based costing is the selection of cost driver. In different types of activities, you might have to select a different cost driver. Like two examples you already see here, that material ordering a cost, the cost driver base should be number of orders. It will be depending on number of orders. For machine setup cost, your cost driver matlab base should be number of times you set up the machine. Number of setups will always be equal to number of batches, because for every new batch you need to set up the machine. Done? Yes. Well, based on this, I will be next giving you some more examples of cost driver. Yes, because in every question it is important, very important, to correctly choose that which cost driver will be used for which activity. Yes, copy this first, then I'll give you some examples for selection of cost drivers. Copy this first. And whatever was in traditional method named like this, that same thing is now in ABC method, but only there is change of name. Budgeted absorption rate is now named as cost driver rate. Budgeted overheads are now named as activity cost pool, and the base is now named as cost driver. Yeah, copy that first. After that, you copy this examples, that is selection of cost drivers, give the heading. Under that, I'm just giving some examples. These few examples will at least help you start some calculations. Then more examples we will see when we solve the questions. In almost every question that you will get, you will already be told in the question that which are the activities involved, and you will also be told that which activity has which cost driver. Because look, as such, you are just solving the question. You are not the actual owner of the company. You are not the actual part of company management. So you will not have an idea that which activity depends on which factor. For common activities like these, you can predict what should be the factor, but in many questions they give you uncommon activities. In such case, the question will tell you what will be the factor on which it depends. but still for your knowledge you should have ideas about some common activities. Yeah, so common activities like these two we already did earlier. After these two, some more examples also I am making you write. Some more examples also I'm giving. Say material ordering cost or material ordering activity depends on the number of purchase orders you make, like you saw in my example 2. Machine setup activity is the cost which is incurred every time I have to set up a machine. Setting up a machine will be done every time when I start a new batch of production. So that machine setup cost depends on number of times I have to set up the machine. Or it can also be called as number of batches, because every time I start a new batch, every such time I have to set up make a new setup. So number of setups is machine setup, not the kind of setup that you are thinking. Yeah, I've seen many students do that in my live batch, so don't be that. So number of setups, machine setups, or it will be same as the number of batches. Sometimes it is also called as number of production runs, like every time I run a fresh batch of production I have to set up the machine. The number of production runs means the number of times you run a fresh lot of production. Yes, these are my two basic examples. Some more examples, like say third example, you continue writing here. Third example I give you is, say, machine operations cost. Machine setup cost, machine operation cost. These are two different things. Look, my machine setup cost might depend on number of times I set up the machine. But my machine operation cost, what will it depend on? My machine operation cost, yes, it will depend on machine hours only. Look, activity based costing does not mean that none of the cost is depending on hours. Activity based costing means that all my cost might not depend on hours. Some items of cost like machine operation will definitely still depend on hours. It will depend on the number of machine hours the product takes. Yes, so if my overheads contains overheads of machine operations, then that machine operations overheads will be still based on machine hours only. Yes, or if I have, say, assembling cost. Maybe my company produces a product, but that production happens in multiple parts. Like when I produce this pencil, my production happens in many different parts of the pencil, but for the final product I need to assemble all these parts together to make the final product. Like say motor car manufacturing, or say vehicles, two-wheeler vehicles manufacturing, even mobile phones, iPhone manufacturing. You know, every parts, all the different components of the iPhone are manufactured in different countries, and from these different countries the parts are sent to China. Now they are also sent to Chennai. iPhone has start a manufacturing plant in Chennai, but even in the Chennai plant they get all the parts ready made. What they do in the Chennai plant is just assembling. Yes, so assembling activity, if assembling is my activity, then my cost driver might be, and write down, number of parts assembled. Like if I am into say motor car manufacturing, then one unit of motor car will have say hundreds of parts which are to be assembled. But if I am into say mobile phone manufacturing, then one mobile phone might have only say 40 different parts to be assembled. So number of parts to be assembled might be the base for distributing my assembling cost. Look, these base that I am giving, these cost drivers that I am giving, these are just examples. Not necessary that every single company will definitely follow this base only. Which base your company should follow depends on how your manufacturing happens. These are just some starting examples which I am giving you so that you have a general idea here. Yes, okay. That is assembling cost. And chalo, one more last example I have here. Supervisory cost, supervisory or supervision cost. Then supervision cost can be based on what? I can say it will be based on number of employees, or it can be based on, say, direct labor, because supervisor will be supervising the workers in my company. So if you have more number of workers, you will need more number of supervisors. Supervisory cost might be based on number of employees or might be based on direct labor. So because if it has more direct labor, then it will need more number of supervisors. Done? Yes, these are certain common examples of what could be the base. These examples are called as the cost driver. Clear? Yes. Chalo, this completes my conceptual theory regarding activity based costing. It completes all the concepts, theories regarding activity based costing. Based on this, next we will start learning some calculations under activity based costing. Mostly the calculations that we will do here, we will be doing calculations both ways. We'll be calculating the answers as per a traditional method. We'll also be calculating answers as per activity based costing method. So most of my questions will involve these steps. Most of my practical questions here in this chapter will involve two steps. Part A, you'll solve the question by traditional method, and part B will solve the question by ABC method. Under each method, there are two things you do. Under traditional method, you find the rate first, and then using that rate, you find the product cost. Similarly, under ABC method, you first find the rate, and then using that rate, you find the product cost. Lastly, we can then compare product cost as per traditional method and ABC method and write some comments and suggestions accordingly to that. Done? Yes, this is what we will be doing in most of our questions. Clear? Yes, questions will be solving from my next session. Yes, this session was only all these revision concepts. Next session onwards, we'll continue with question number 2 in your book, and all the questions of activity based costing will be finishing off in the next session. Done? Yes. Look, as you have noticed, in my sessions, I will be spending more time in concepts and explanations. Then when it comes to calculations, at least for these revision chapters, revision topics, calculations will go a little fast. I've also given you some ready formats in the calculations that can save some time. But please keep revising on a daily basis. Daily revisions I need you to do, at least regarding all the concepts here. Done? Yes. Okay, then that's all. Thank you very much. That is end of my session here. We'll be continuing with the next session in the we'll be continuing with the chapter in the next session. Done? Bye bye.